what is the biggest shift happening right now in the pharma industry when they think about aging and longevity?
I think the industry is beginning to look at aging as something that they could modify, that they could control, slow down, and by virtue of that, bring the benefit of a longer lifespan to all their patients. See, traditionally, pharma has developed products looking at certain disease conditions, cardiovascular, diabetes, cancer. But now, when you apply the lens where they are looking at aging itself as the biggest factor, they can now see that they would be able to control all of these underlying conditions if they are able to address aging. Then the next step automatically begets the question: can companies target the biology of aging directly?
Let's talk about deep longevity, what deep longevity actually does in terms of how pharma companies are using your product.
Yes, so deep longevity is enabling the entire longevity ecosystem through biological aging clocks. See, we are a preventive health AI driven company. In the field of longevity, some companies are looking to develop drugs, some are looking to develop innovative diagnostics, others are running smarter clinical trials. Our role is to provide the measurement and analytical technology that helps all of these efforts. The pharma industry is beginning to look at biological age as an surrogate endpoint to improve the clinical trials. We have created the technology that turns complex biological data into quantitative measure of biological age and at the rate at which someone is aging.
Welcome to Pharmatica.io, the podcast that explores the pharmaceutical life cycle through real world insights and practical strategies. I'm your host, Shubhangi Dua, podcast producer and B2B journalist. Today's conversation is with Deepankar Nayak, CEO of Deep Longevity, a company at the forefront of using AI to measure biological age. This episode, we will be talking about biological age, why it matters more than the number on your birth certificate, and also what that means for the future of drug development. Welcome, Dipankar. It's so great to have you on. How are you doing today?
Very well, Shubhangi. Thank you so much. Thanks for having me on the show.
So let's get started by setting the agenda for this episode. And by that, I mean is if there's one key message that you'd like to share with the audience so they stay tuned in.
Sure. So my, I think, top line message would be that we should all look at aging as something which is modifiable, like a modifiable biological process, rather than an inevitable consequence of getting older. There are a lot of attempts happening by researchers all over the world where they are looking at longevity as a platform using which they could come up with new innovations which would help people live longer, live healthier, as against trying to react to disease conditions which come up. I think that is what is top of my mind right now.
Okay, that's actually a great key takeaway. So let's begin. My first question is, what is the biggest shift happening right now in the pharma industry when they think about aging and longevity?
Yes, like I said, I think the industry is beginning to look at aging as something that they could modify, that they could control, slow down, and by virtue of that, bring the benefit of a longer lifespan to all their patients. See, traditionally, pharma has developed products looking at certain disease conditions, cardiovascular, diabetes, cancer. But now, when you apply the lens where they are looking at aging itself as the biggest factor, they can now see that they would be able to control all of these underlying conditions if they are able to address aging. Then the next step automatically begets the question: can companies target the biology of aging directly? Can companies remove senescent cells from the body? For an example, rather than focusing on, let's say, arthritis or frailty or Alzheimer's. If you can slow down the biological aging process, you may be able to delay the onset of multiple diseases or even completely eradicate them in the future. And in this context, I have to say, biological aging clocks have become very important. You need these statistics to measure the biology of aging. Think about it. You can't run a 30, 40 year long clinical trial every time you want to test a longevity intervention. And for decades, that was the biggest barrier in front of the pharma industry. But at longevity, with our biological aging clocks, I think we have a very good solution to this problem.
Okay, so before we get into the biomarkers with tech and with regards to deep longevity, I was just thinking about how you said that basically taking those preventative measures is the way to prevent a lot of these diseases, especially that come later, like as you grow older. For instance, Alzheimer's, dementia, especially arthritis. So I completely agree with you. And I was just recently watching an old podcast by Brian Johnson, who is like known for reducing his biological age to 18, and he's in his late 40s now. And recently he had this he he announced that there was an issue basically with his gut lining, and I wonder, is it to do with all the measures he's taking for his biological age and how that works in terms of like the tech guiding us? How do you balance that out?
We need someone like Brian Johnson in the industry, I guess, to bring the spotlight when you are innovating, when you are trying to do something new. There is always resistance, and there is always people who would want a lot of evidence, and potentially you could spend a lot of time gathering that evidence, or you could do something which is really interesting and sort of preempt that focus and that investment from the industry. But there is always a balance, right, when you are trying to do too many things. And I think Brian has the advantage of having an entire team looking after him, and creating separate protocols for him, running experiments, and which is great, right? I like to do that. It's my body. I like to run small controlled experiments, try new things, and see how my health is responding to that in a very limited control manner. I obviously don't have a large team at my disposal to look after me. So in essence, what I'm trying to say is that we really don't need to do all of those things that Brian is doing. I think it's interesting to follow. It won't be possible for most people to do everything that he is doing. There might be a lot of downsides to things that are new, that are experimental. If they are not done under proper supervision of healthcare professionals, you may actually end up harming your health. But you should be inspired that we have, and someone has that ambition that really wants to defeat aging and really wants to slow down or reverse their biological aging. And that's what we are all here for. That's what we are also trying to support through our technology in deep longevity. And it is being shown that it is possible. Now, the degree to which you realize that, now, of course, depends on many things. What are you doing? How well you are doing? How compliant and adherent you are? And that's something we can discuss in this call as well.
Absolutely. And also, coming to that, there's also a lot of research about biological age and how it might predict health outcomes like hospitalization, mortality risk, better than your chronological age. And why do you think that distinction is so important for medicine, especially?
Yes, it does. So, see, biological age captures the cumulative effect of genetics, lifestyle, environment, disease, and medical interventions. One of our partners recently published a very powerful paper where they showed that individuals whose biological age exceeded their chronological age experienced significant greater risks of both hospitalizations as well as all cause mortality, even after adjusting for established clinical risk factors. Biological age is telling you how your body is functioning. Two people can be both 50 years old, but biologically, one may resemble a healthier cohort, while the other has the physiology of someone older. That difference is incredibly important because it determines disease risk, resilience, and capacity of recovery. For medicine, this represents a shift to truly personalized care. It gives clinicians a much more accurate picture of an individual's health trajectory. And that is why we are seeing increasingly biological age emerge as a strong predictor of outcomes such as hospitalization, frailty, response to treatment, and even mortality. We are seeing the adoption of biological age measures globally in longevity clinics, in wellness clinics, as well as hospitals, as well as public health.
So it's great to see that now, like, even when my parents, I suppose, when they last visited the hospital, the prescription actually said you need to do strength training, so which I've been like pushing for a long time. So I can see that there is change coming in medicine as well. And now I think tech kind of does help support that. But what happens when people start relying on drugs like GLP-1, Ozempic? So, and they have been the limelight this past year, especially when it comes to weight loss, even though they were meant to be for people who had diabetes. And then there are so many risks now being highlighted associated to a GLP-1. What's your take on that?
GLP-1s are, I think, one of the most interesting case studies in modern medicine that have emerged, primarily because they have moved so much faster than anyone expected, and also driven by consumer demand, which has, I think, resulted in even short circuiting and shortening some of the regulatory approvals and procedures. But I do want to comment on what you said before in terms of strength training, which is so important. And these are the things, and again, going back to what we discussed about what Brian is doing, we could do the simple things which are now known, which are proven, and has huge benefits. Strength training is being recommended even in the elderly, like you said, with their parents and people who are in their care homes, people who could be even in their 80s, that even if they do a little bit of strength training, it really improves their health, it improves their balance, their it helps in the muscle mass. And that is so incredible that you are having that conversation with your parents. So congratulations on that.
Thank you.
Coming back to GLP-1s, I think they have moved from being diabetes drugs to mainstream metabolic and weight management therapies. And now the conversation is naturally expanding into longevity. The key shift is we are realizing these drugs aren't just about weight loss. Potentially, they're acting as a central regulator of metabolic health, glucose control, insulin sensitivity, inflammation, appetite signaling. And all of these are deeply connected to aging biology. One of the recommendations that comes up through our AI is intermittent fasting, and it has shown to be so effective. And GLP-1s are actually helping the body mimic that. However, the cautious evidence based view is that we still don't have definitive proof that GLP-1s extend lifespan in humans. That data might take years and even decades. But what we do have is strong evidence that they improve many of the major risk factors that drive age related diseases like obesity, type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular risk. So I think the conversation is shifting from are these GLP-1s just weight loss drugs to are these systemic metabolic reset drugs that actually change disease trajectories. And that is what gets longevity researchers very excited, because if you are able to reduce the incidence or delay the onset of chronic diseases, you are affecting lifespan already. I just want to touch upon, and I think these are early days, but there is also an emerging hypothesis that GLP-1s may have effects beyond metabolism on brain health. There is a lot of research happening on the gut brain axis as well. And by virtue of that, they can potentially affect addiction pathways as well, we'll see, and inflammation. But I think people are beginning to realize the possibility that GLP-1s can meaningfully modify co-drivers of biological aging.
Okay, that's quite interesting. Especially because now I think the last I read about GLP-1, there were lots of cases with inflamed pancreas that came to light. And then in the past, for instance, when we think about creatine, there's a big buzz on creatine right now in the market. In the past, creatine was considered as this particular uh, a product for only people who were basically bodybuilders or into athletics. And now it's changed. Now studies apparently show that it's actually highly encouraged for women to take it. In the past there were lots of cautions: if you don't drink enough water with creatine, there could be a lot of implications for your liver. So there's a lot of conversations changing around these things. Do you have a take on that?
So my view is that we need to be cautious about these emerging practices before we go all in, right? Something comes up and people start talking about it, and there could be influencers who are taking it to social media, and then there is a buzz around it, and suddenly you'll find clinics who are sort of focused on that one intervention, or that one therapy, and they are advising a lot of people to do that. And if it becomes popular, studies are done, and then people find out that, well, either it is not as effective as it was claimed to be, or it has downsides and side effects which have not been studied properly. VO2 max is another parameter, right? There's been a lot of buzz around VO2 max, and then recently there's been publications which have showed that VO2 max is not as effective a parameter of measuring longevity as it was thought. So it affects us a lot, because as a company which has aging clocks in the market, and using those aging clocks when we give recommendations, digital interventions, we want to be also up to date with what is happening in the industry. But I think it has helped us to be on the cautious side of things, where we want to actually see proper evidence coming in before we actually incorporate such a thing that you should also do. So I would say that people should, you can always try, right, if something is coming in as a lifestyle thing. But if it is in terms of, let's say, diet or exercise and strength training and things like that, these tend to have very less downsides as against adopting, let's say, specialized supplements or medications, right? So that's where I'll be a little cautious. You may hear people talking about rapamycin and things like that. Goes back to what I was saying before, that when you are doing that, these are powerful drugs. You need to sort of understand what it does to your body, and you should only do it under the care of a healthcare professional.
Let's talk about deep longevity now. Can you explain what it means to actually practice biomarkers in aging, what deep longevity actually does in terms of how pharma companies are using your product?
Yes. So deep longevity is enabling the entire longevity ecosystem through biological aging clocks. See, we are a preventive health AI driven company. We are not focusing on developing therapeutic ourselves, but we do use digital interventions to improve health and longevity through our products through the aging clocks. Now, in the field of longevity, some companies are looking to develop drugs, some are looking to develop innovative diagnostics, others are running smarter clinical trials. Our role is to provide the measurement and analytical technology that helps all of these efforts. I strongly believe, going back to the point, that if you are trying to demonstrate longevity intervention, you really don't have the luxury of running a 40-year-old clinical trial, that the pharma industry is beginning to look at biological age as an surrogate endpoint to improve the clinical trials. We have created the technology that turns complex biological data into quantitative measure of biological age and at the rate at which someone is aging. This gives researchers a much faster readout of whether an intervention is changing the underlying biology. Pharma industries are looking at using these clocks to identify patients who are biologically aging the fastest and therefore may benefit most from a certain therapy. So, this will help in patient recruitment. They can track the trials and see if the trials are actually making meaningful progress early in the life cycle. And if they aren't, then they can possibly even make adjustments to trial protocol, looking at the biological age predictions. And this could be in terms of changes in dosage or other things, but they could transform those trials into truly adaptive clinical trials. There's an opportunity to do that. And thirdly, and it will be a bold claim, but I think we will only know this once we actually deploy this and we are actually able to run those experiments at length. But potentially, they can use biological age to even terminate programs that are not showing the desired benefit and save millions of dollars in the process. And that money can be reinvested in their R&D programs.
Okay. That's interesting. How is it different from actually sourcing data from, let's say, Aura or a Whoop? Of if patients were given an Aura ring or a Whoop band, how would deep longevity differ from that?
So we have looked at wearables ourselves, right? And I'll be very candid about that. We have had a couple of attempts on wearables. I think they're very good from a consumer behavior standpoint. They sort of encourage better habits from you. You are more active. You are walking more, running more. You'll be more aware in terms of your diet. You have a CGM. Then you're sort of watching what you are eating, and it sort of creates a virtuous cycle, which is fantastic. When it comes to meaningfully modeling that data for biological aging, we didn't find it to be very reliable, right? So we couldn't model wearables data for biological age prediction. We saw that it doesn't really work very well. But that was in the past. We may do it again in the future and arrive at a different conclusion. So as of now, from a deep longevity standpoint, we are not looking at integrating wearables data into our platforms.
Well, maybe in the future, when you do decide to do a wearable, maybe it'll actually be more effective and focus fully on deciphering one's biological age and preventing onset diseases. So I look forward to
Possible.
that future. Yeah. If you had to give one key takeaway to a C suite pharma leader listening today, something that they should be thinking about now, and even though aging isn't yet classified as a disease, what would it be?
I think it would be exactly what you said. I would say don't wait for aging to be formally recognized as a disease before building a longevity strategy. Start integrating biological aging into your clinical studies today. See, the pharma leadership could do it retrospectively. Right? They have all the clinical trials data. This is all logged down. They could look at all that data. Then they could retrospectively apply that on the biological aging clocks. Using that, they could now assume, well, if we had this statistic available and then we use it as a surrogate endpoint, how does it behave respective to the actual clinical endpoints that we had in the study? Does it correlate very well? Does it go in the same direction as the clinical endpoints that we had? Is it possible that they are more sensitive to what was happening in the trial? Is it possible that if we actually had this data and were willing to make decisions based on biological aging, we could have actually taken some of the decisions that we eventually did in a clinical trial much before? The other scenario as well about trials that didn't succeed. Is it possible that the industry could have concluded that this trial is not going in the direction that they were thinking using biological age if they had that statistic available? And if they did, could they have terminated or stopped that trial earlier? Or could they have changed their protocols and adapted those clinical trials, which they maybe eventually did, and improved upon that? So, all of these are possibilities which I think the industry can do right now without incurring a lot of cost. I strongly believe the companies that will lead over the next decade are those that start incorporating biological aging into their R&D today. That means thinking about biological age as a health marker, using it to improve patient stratification, identify responders, design smarter, faster, adaptive clinical trials. Biological aging clocks, in my mind, would also be very powerful in measuring ROI in patient support programs. It would be the easiest way to redirect resources to programs that are really benefiting patients. And that, by the way, is a big problem in the industry, right? They do want to do a lot for the patients, but then they are not sure what's the best way to do about it. And we offer, through biological aging, a quantitative measure. I think we are at a similar moment to where genomics was 20 years back. Back then, many companies viewed genomics as interesting but optional. Today, it is embedded throughout drug discovery and precision medicine. I strongly believe biological aging will follow a similar trajectory. So, my advice is simple: start building that capability now. You really don't have to bet on creating a longevity drug. You want to be learning, partnering, and generating evidence based on biological aging today, using retrospective data, and then applying it on the clinical trials that are already happening. Because by the time the field is fully mature, the competitive advantage will belong to those who started early.
That's so true. I completely agree with you there. And with that, Dipankar, thank you so much for walking us through how biological age is moving from a research concept to something that pharma leaders may have to, in fact, should take seriously in the years ahead. And I believe that they will, because I don't think it's just a fad. I don't think biomarkers for biological aging is it's not a fad anymore. I think they would want to deploy it in clinical trials for best patient outcomes.
Thank you.
So, for more information, please visit deeplongevity.com. To our Pharmatica community, thanks for tuning in. If you found this episode valuable, please follow, rate, and share. Join the conversation on X and LinkedIn at pharmatica.io or visit our website for more expert insights. Thank you.